On the last day of February, Donald Trump launched the biggest war the Middle East had seen in decades, a gamble that is rapidly reshaping the entire global order. Coordinated with Israel, the war began with massive Israeli airstrikes that killed Iran's 86-year-old supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with his defense minister, the head of the IRGC, and dozens of other senior officials. Within 6 days, the U.S. flew over 2,000 strikes across Iran, sinking most of the Iranian navy. A submarine kill of Sri Lanka marked the first such U.S. victory since World War II. America's Joint Chiefs Chairman said the opening day used nearly double the munitions dropped on Saddam's Iraq in 2003's shock and awe. Israel claimed to be striking 1,000 targets daily, enabled by overflights of Syria and U.S. aerial refueling. More than 1,000 Iranian civilians have been killed. Israel's goal is clear: grind down Iran's military and cause regime collapse. America's objectives are vaguer. Trump has called for a revolution but also offered to cut a deal. His secretaries of state and war have cited destroying Iran's ballistic missiles, navy, and nuclear program as goals. The stated justifications vary. Iran was too close to a nuclear weapon. Iran was about to attack first. Israel would have struck regardless, so the U.S. had to preempt. The real reason, however, is cold geopolitical calculus. The Iranian regime was at its weakest in decades. Water resources destroyed, economy in free fall, and a popular uprising in January that was brutally crushed with an estimated 7,000, 30,000 protesters killed. Trump had drawn a red line against such massacres, but the U.S. military wasn't ready to respond. After the crackdown, the U.S. rushed assets to the region, the largest buildup since the 2003 Iraq invasion, and then decided to attack Iran's retaliation, attacking everyone else. Iran retaliated not just against the U.S. and Israel, but against nearly every neighbor. It fired hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of kamikaze drones into Oman, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Cyprus, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. On day one alone, 180 missiles toward Israel and 250 toward the Gulf states. The UAE reported 189 ballistic missiles and 941 drones, of which 93% were intercepted. Damage still occurred. Dubai's Fairmont Hotel on the Palm Jumeirah was set ablaze. Debris hit the Burj Al Arab and Dubai International Airport. Most notably, Iranian drones struck 3 Amazon data centers, 2 in Dubai, 1 in Bahrain, marking the first wartime attacks on critical AI infrastructure. This shattered Dubai's economic model as an oasis of stability. For decades, the city attracted foreign businesses, wealthy expats, and regional offices because of its safety. Now, with missiles and interceptors roaring overhead, that illusion is gone. Political risk insurance will rise, and foreign residents may leave. Interceptor crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. The Gulf states have fired an enormous number of expensive interceptors, roughly 800 to stop 400 incoming ballistic missiles. That's 5 times the interceptors the U.S. used in the entire First Gulf War. No one knows how many they have left. Such stockpiles are state secrets. If they run low, they may have to choose which cities to defend. That could force them to pressure Washington to end the war. Meanwhile, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical oil and LNG choke point, and threatened to set any passing ship ablaze. 1/3 of seaborne oil and 1/5 of LNG normally transit the strait daily. Iran has thousands of naval mines and fast boats to enforce the blockade. By week's end, 3,000 merchant vessels were stranded, 10% of the global container fleet. Iraq ran out of oil storage and shut fields. Kuwait and the UAE may follow. Saudi Arabia can use a Red Sea pipeline, but most of its exports still require Hormuz. Oil prices jumped 14%, European gas prices 70%. Malaysia, a major Persian Gulf oil buyer, has been hit hardest. The longer the strait stays closed, the worse global inflation and economic growth will suffer, and Russia will earn more from its own oil and gas sales funding its war in Ukraine. Why Iran attacks its neighbors. Iran's real aim is to inflict maximum economic pain to force Trump to stop the war. Even though none of the Gulf states allowed the U.S. to use their bases or airspace for the initial strikes, Iran uses the presence of U.S. bases as justification. By attacking the Gulf states and their energy infrastructure, Iran pressures the U.S. while also alienating China, the region's top oil customer, and pushing the Gulf states closer to Israel. It's a huge gamble. It might work, or it might invite retaliation against Iran's own oil exports and desalination plants. Aviation and global chaos. The war has gutted Middle Eastern aviation. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, the world's busiest connecting hubs, have seen their airports damaged and airspaces closed. Over 18,000 flights were canceled in week one. With Russian airspace closed to Western airlines, only two narrow aerial highways remain, one over the Caucasus, Central Asia, the other over Egypt and central Saudi Arabia. Both are longer and more expensive. Tens of thousands of passengers are stranded, including roughly 1 million Americans whom the U.S. government has urged to evacuate, but there are no flights. The official advice for Americans in Israel: take a bus to Egypt and fly from there. About 12% of global air freight, including half of Europe-China air freight, has ground to a halt. Snarling supply chains on top of Trump's tariffs. Worse escalations ahead. Iran could still escalate further. If it holds back its best ballistic missiles, it might target the Gulf states' water desalination plants. 90% of Kuwait's drinking water comes from desalination, 86% of Oman's, 70% of Saudi Arabia's, 42% of the UAE. A leaked 2009 U.S. cable warned that a successful Iranian strike on Saudi desalination would force the evacuation of Riyadh, 7 million people, within a week. The Gulf states are deeply paranoid about this, and if the Iranian regime feels it has nothing to lose, it might try. Some Gulf states are now considering joining the war openly. Qatar has already shot down Iranian bombers. They might open their airspace and bases to the U.S., though that risks friendly fire. Kuwait already shot down 3 U.S. jets. European nations are being dragged in. Britain will allow U.S. strikes from Cyprus and Diego Garcia. Greece sent F-16S and a frigate to Cyprus. An Iranian missile hit a French naval base in Abu Dhabi. A missile fired at Turkey, a NATO member, has triggered talks about invoking Article 5, which would commit all 32 NATO allies to the Kurdish gambit and the risk of balkanization. The CIA is reportedly arming Iranian Kurdish militias in Iraqi Kurdistan and urging them to cross into Iran's Kurdish regions. U.S. and Israeli strikes have cleared a path. Washington, unwilling to commit its own ground troops, hopes that Kurdish militias and other ethnic three Azeris, Arabs, Baluchis, will rise up and topple the regime. This is extremely reckless. Iran's 92 million people are 60% Persian, 40% other ethnicities. While many Persians despise the regime after the January massacres, they may rally behind it if the alternative is ethnic militias carving up the country. A Yugoslav-style civil war like those in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, a collapsed Iran would be catastrophically worse than the failed states of Iraq and Syria, given Iran's size, population, and nuclear materials. Terrorism, refugees, and weapons proliferation would spill across the region for years. Trump's trap Trump is now in a deep hole. If he bows to economic pressure and ends the war, he will infuriate Israel and the Gulf states who were dragged in and now want the regime gone. It would also teach Iran that attacking the Gulf states works, guaranteeing future blackmail. If he continues the war without removing the regime, global economic fallout will worsen. His popularity, already at 27% support according to YouGov, will sink, and foreign powers may demand a ceasefire. The longer the war goes on, the more dangerous the escalation ladder becomes, including a possible U.S. amphibious seizure of Iran's Kar Island, which handles 90% of Iran's oil exports. Taking Kar Island would require only a few thousand Marines, but it would spike oil prices further and might still not stop Iran's Hormuz blockade. If Iran then destroys Gulf desalination plants, the region would face apocalypse. This is one of those weeks where decades happen. The war has already transformed the Middle East security architecture, the global energy market, and international air travel. Thousands are dead. The illusion of Gulf stability is shattered, and no one knows how it ends.